The Story of Lansdowne by Doris O Marks, August 20th, 1938. 1938 brings to an end the first half-century of Lansdowne history. 50 years ago, 3 large farms covered the whole territory. The houses were scattered and little is known of the people who lived in them. In 1888, Mr. Samuel Crothers bought one of the farms and divided the ground into building lots. Mr. Habercorn, the first purchaser, bought lots at Hammond's Ferry Road and 2nd Avenue. Mr. Habercorn opened a saloon and amusement park near his home, and large crowds flocked here from the city on Sundays and holidays. People came from afar, driving their families for a day of pleasure in the country. The fame of Lansdowne spread, and in 1892, the Baltimore and Ohio built a station here. Soon the trains were bringing large crowds to Habercorn's Park, and often they were forced to run special trains. St. Clement's Catholic Church was the first church organized in the community. In 1891, a beautiful building was erected, and Father Holden was the first priest called to officiate in the parish. Mr. C.W. Hall began to develop that section of Lansdowne known as Joshua and also Hilltop, which lies south of 5th Avenue. He must have been a public-spirited individual who looked to the future when Lansdowne would be a thriving community. For in the next few years, he donated grounds for 3 Protestant churches and for the Firemen's Hall. In 1891, a Lutheran congregation was organized, and their first service was held in a storeroom. The next year, a small frame church was erected, and Reverend Conrad Goads was called to serve as the first pastor. A few years later, the Methodist Church began to hold services in the store, which still stands at Hammond's Ferry Road and Elizabeth Avenue. Sometime later, they built their house of worship on Baltimore and Laverne. This church became famous far and wide for their annual Sunday school picnics. On that day, special trains ran throughout the whole day to bring large crowds from the city to enjoy the festivities. Children in Lansdowne first began their education by trudging the long distance to school on Washington Road. As families continued to come here to make their homes, the need arose for a school, and the first classes were held temporarily in the large house where the Knights of Columbus have made their home in recent years. Miss Neely Welchlager was the first teacher, and she continued to teach there until the new school was completed. This building is still being used for the education of the young, as it was purchased only a few years ago for the use of the boys and girls of St. Clement's Church. Early in 1902, a group of prominent citizens met at Mr. Habercorn's home, and the Lansdowne Volunteer Fire Association was organized. Mr. Hull donated a lot, and a small engine house was erected later that same year. A number of active members donated time, money, and services to make the new organization a success. Many social activities of the fire company brought pleasure to all Lansdowne. Large sums of money were realized by holding oyster roast and bull roast. A gala parade was held every Thanksgiving Day, and annual picnics were held in May, and all Lansdowne residents were invited to participate. About the same time, a group of men organized the Lansdowne Improvement Association and began a long, bitter fight for improvements. They were being enjoyed by other communities throughout the county. It is interesting to note that the county commissioners began to promise walks for Hammond's Ferry Road 40 years ago, and those promises are no nearer fulfillment today. The chaos of the World War touched Lansdowne when 70 of their young men answered the call of their country in its time of need. As every other town and village in the land, so did Lansdowne also suffer, and pray and wait for the day when their loved ones would return. 3 young men made the supreme sacrifice. The whole community welcomed back their heroes with a wonderful celebration in the Firemen's Hall, and residents of Lansdowne still talk of that glorious day. In 1919, a group of determined women began a vigorous fight for a new school. The crowded conditions in the old building had become so bad that even the portables were filled to overflowing. The Patrons Club demanded a large and modern school. They canvassed the town with petitions. They stormed the offices of the Board of Education until at last the officials were forced to pay them heed. In 1920, the cornerstone of the new building was laid, and all of Lansdowne rejoiced. No history of Lansdowne would be complete without a word of praise from Miss Mary Cullen, who served so long and faithfully as the beloved principal of the public school. In January 1920, Walter Howard Shaw Post, veteran of foreign wars, was organized and received its name for 3 Lansdowne men who had given their lives for their country. Those ex-servicemen, together with their ladies' auxiliary, have kept alive their memories of the World War and have helped to foster a true spirit of patriotism throughout the whole community. Lansdowne continued to grow and prosper. A hard-working, industrious people made their homes here. Houses sprang up everywhere. In 1925, the residents rejoiced when city water was installed all throughout. They groaned and still continue to do so in 1938 at the heavy tax burden that was placed upon them for this convenience. In the spring of 1928, gas was brought to the village, and this proved a great step in its progress. In April 1929, the ground was broken for a new Lutheran church, and on December 1st, a beautiful house of worship was dedicated with impressive services. Dark days lay ahead for the people of Lansdowne. The Depression struck with full force, and many homes were made desolate. Life savings were lost overnight, and unemployment came without warning. Many citizens were forced to earn a bare livelihood by accepting any work they could secure. Many could find no job at all and had to accept help wherever they might find it. One benefit, however, came at this time when Baltimore Avenue was selected as a federal project, and over 60 Lansdowne men found employment in the improvements of the street. Slowly but surely, Lansdowne emerged from its dark despair and is gradually being restored to normal. The years of the Depression hit heavy on the volunteer fire department also. In 1937, it seemed there could be no alternative but to disband. Sufficient funds were lacking, and Lansdowne residents felt slight interest in the welfare of this organization. Public meetings were held, and through the advice of Mr. B.H. Shipley, the state president, a lady auxiliary was formed. This group of determined women went to work with a will, and soon the future looked bright again. All Lansdowne began to take an interest in the volunteer firemen, and today there are no finer organization in the community. Doris O Marks, August 20th, 1938.